The words landed like a blade between his ribs, slow and precise. You're not getting sick, sir. Someone is making you sick. Bae-Hoon set his coffee cup down. Not quickly, not with alarm, with the kind of careful, measured stillness that kept him alive in rooms far more dangerous than this hotel lobby. The girl standing beside his table couldn't have been older than 9, maybe 10. Dark brown skin, natural hair pulled into 2 puffs tied with bright orange bands, and eyes that held a seriousness no child that age had any right owning. "Say that again," he said quietly. "The woman you came in with yesterday, the one who calls herself your assistant." She crossed her arms with the firm authority of someone twice her size. "She puts something in your drinks when you're not looking. I've been watching. My grandmother says you can smell illness that's been invited in, and yours was invited." Around them, the hotel breakfast crowd buzzed and clinked and laughed, completely unbothered. His personal guard, Jin-Soo, sat 4 tables away pretending to read a newspaper. Bae-Hoon raised 2 fingers slightly. "Stay. You've been watching me," he repeated. "My mom works the early kitchen shift here. I wait for her every morning before school." She pointed toward the service corridor. "I sit in that corner. Nobody notices me, but I notice everything." Bae-Hoon studied her face. In his world, people lied constantly and skillfully, but there was something in the girl's expression. Not nervousness, not performance, just a flat, calm certainty of someone stating an obvious truth. He had been dizzy for 3 weeks. His hands trembled at night. 3 separate doctors had found nothing. Blamed travel fatigue and stress. Ji-young, his senior assistant of 4 years, had been quietly solicitous through all of it, bringing him herbal packets for his morning tea, adjusting his supplements, staying close. "What's your name?" he asked. "Adaeze, but my mom calls me Ada." "Ada." He folded his hands on the table. "You understand what you've told me is a very serious accusation against a person who works directly for me." "I know." She didn't flinch. "My grandmother always says that staying quiet when you see wrong makes you part of the wrong. And your driver gave my mom his umbrella last month when she was caught in the rain outside the car park. She cried when she told me, said she'd been having a terrible month, and that small kindness almost broke her." Ada met his eyes steadily. "So I'm telling you." Something shifted behind Bae-Hoon's sternum. Not softness exactly. Something older than that. Something he buried under years of operating in shadows and building power through precision and distance. He reached into his jacket. Ada's mother appeared at that exact moment, rushing from the corridor in a staff uniform, face tight with panic. "Ada!" "Oh no, I'm so sorry, Mr. Bae-Hoon. She knows she's not supposed to." "She was keeping me company," he said smoothly. He placed several folded bills on the table's edge without drama. "For the trouble, she's a remarkable girl." Ada's mother took the money with shaking hands, bowing repeatedly, pulling her daughter away. Ada looked back once. Her expression was clean and simple. "I told you the truth. The rest is yours to carry." Bae-Hoon picked up his coffee. He did not drink it. If that beginning reached into you and didn't let go, stay right where you are. Drop a comment. What are you feeling right now? Trust, betrayal, something you can't name yet? Tell me where you're watching from and subscribe, because every story on this channel is built to stay with you. This one especially. Now back to Bae-Hoon. He returned to his suite and called Jin-Soo before the elevator had finished rising. "I need you to pull Ji-young's full background again. Not the version we ran 4 years ago. Fresh. Everything. Bank activity, communications. Who she has been meeting for the last 6 months. And find me a private toxicologist. Someone with no connection to anyone I know. I want my blood tested today." Silence. Then Jin-Soo said, "Boss." "Ji-young." "Today?" Bae-Hoon said, and ended the call. He stood at the window of his suite, the city spreading below him like a circuit board, all light and logic and hidden current. Ji-young had come to him through a trusted former colleague. She was composed, meticulous, loyal in the way that efficient people were loyal, through usefulness. He had never questioned it. He questioned everything about everything except the people woven tightly into his daily structure. That, he now understood, had been the gap. His phone buzzed. A text from Ji-young herself. You're 11 o'clock confirmed. I've arranged the car. Shall I bring your morning supplements up? He stared at the message a long moment, then typed back, I'll come down. Don't worry about the supplements. He watched to see if she responded quickly or slowly. It took 40 seconds. Of course. See you at 11. 40 seconds to compose herself. He had worked with Ji-young long enough to know she responded to routine messages in under 10. He got the blood results late that afternoon, delivered to a secondary address Jin-soo maintained. The toxicologist, a precise woman who asked zero unnecessary questions, called him directly. She spoke carefully and completely. What she described were compounds that accumulated over weeks. Compounds that disrupted the central nervous system gradually enough that no single test would flag them unless you were specifically looking. They caused trembling, disorientation, eventually, insufficient accumulation, cardiac events that presented as natural. Bae-Hoon thanked her and sat for a very long time in a chair by the window, with the city humming below him. He had built his organization over 15 years, starting from nothing, from grief, from the specific and clarifying fury of watching his family's business destroyed by a rival who had smiled at his father's face and moved against him in secret. Bae-Hoon had sworn he would never be caught the way his father was caught, trusting the nearest hand, missing the knife already in it. He had been meticulous, paranoid in ways that read as professional. He had people check on people. He did not eat at events without precaution. He had protocols. And still, he thought of Ada, standing beside his breakfast table in a hotel lobby. She wasn't supposed to be in. A 10-year-old child with her grandmother's words living in her chest, watching the world with eyes that missed nothing, deciding on a Tuesday morning to walk up to a dangerous man and hand him his life back. Jin-soo called at 7 in the evening. We have the full picture, boss. He listened without interrupting. Ji-young's brother carried debt, deep, structural debt to a competitor organization that had been quietly circling Bae-Hoon's territory for 2 years. The approach had been made to Ji-young 14 months ago. She had agreed. The transfers were subtle, incremental, layered through accounts that required real effort to trace. She was not careless. She had simply, in the end, been found anyway. What do you want to do? Jin-soo asked. Bae-Hoon thought about it. The answer his world expected was unambiguous and final. He had delivered that answer before to people who had earned it. He was not sentimental about what his choices had cost others when those others had drawn the fight. But Ji-young was not facing him across a territory line. She had been inside his home. She had eaten meals with him, traveled with him, seen him tired and sick and human. He had, at points, trusted her the way a person trusts someone who has simply always been there. That kind of betrayal asked something different of him. He wasn't sure yet what. Get me everything documented, he said. Every transaction, every communication. Compile it cleanly. I'm going to need it prepared for multiple purposes, and I'm going to decide what those purposes are after I sleep. And Ji-young, she doesn't know yet that I know. I'd like to keep it that way for 24 hours. The next morning, he came down at his usual time. Ji-young was already at the lobby workspace. Laptop open, coffee prepared, a small paper bag of supplements beside it. Bae-Hoon sat across from her, poured himself coffee from the carafe, left the supplements untouched. Walk me through today's schedule, he said. She walked him through it. Her voice was professional and even. Her hands were still. She was very good at this, he thought. She had always been very good at it. He asked follow-up questions about 2 meetings, made a small adjustment to the afternoon timing, thanked her for handling a venue change the day prior. Completely normal. She relaxed fractionally with each minute that passed without incident. He watched her relax and felt something cold and clear and very sad settle over him. That evening, Bae-Hoon visited Ada and her mother. They lived in a building 20 minutes from the hotel, in a neighborhood where the streets were loud and alive, and the buildings told stories in their facades. He came without security, which was an act of deliberate trust he rarely offered anyone. Ada's mother, whose name was Ngozi, opened the door and went white. Mr. Bae-Hoon, I came to say thank you properly. He held a bag out. Inside, groceries, an envelope, a small gift wrapped in paper that had caused his assistant significant confusion when he described it. A high-quality illustrated field guide to medicinal plants from around the world, annotated in both Korean and English, and to tell you that your daughter was right about everything. Ada appeared from behind her mother, and her face lit with a satisfaction that was completely, purely earned. "I knew it," she said. "Yes." He crouched to her level. "You did." He looked at her seriously. "I need you to understand something, Ada. The person you saw, she works for a group of people who do not leave loose ends. If they find out what you told me, they will consider you a problem. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but because you deserve the truth and because I need you to take what's in that envelope and let your mother take you somewhere safe until I tell you otherwise." Ada processed this with the same unhurried calm she seemed to bring to everything. "Are you going to fix it?" "Yes." "Will anyone get hurt?" He held her gaze. "I'm going to try very hard to make sure the people who get hurt are only the ones who chose this path. I won't lie to you and promise it's clean. My world isn't clean, but I'm going to do this as right as I know how." Ada nodded slowly, as if she were filing this answer carefully in a drawer somewhere. "Okay." Her grandmother had taught her well. That was the thought, that walk with Bae-Hoon all the way back to his car. Someone had taken the time to build that child into something extraordinary. And that child had spent 30 seconds in a hotel lobby doing what so many people with far more power had failed to do, the right thing, simply because it was right. Over the following days, Bae-Hoon moved with the same precision he'd spent 15 years developing, except that he moved it in a direction he hadn't chosen before. He called in lawyers first, not enforcers. He had the documentation assembled and verified, triple-sourced, unimpeachable. He contacted the relevant authorities through channels that kept his organization's exposure minimal while ensuring Ji-young's activities were fully on record. He had a conversation with the competing organization's leadership, cold, brief, direct. He had what they thought they'd been working to neutralize. He also had things they didn't know he had. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. The outcome was an agreement that cost him one small territory concession and cost him any remaining leverage over his operation. He walked away with the ground solid under him in a way it hadn't been in months. Ji-young was arrested the following Thursday. She didn't contact him, and he didn't contact her. There was nothing left to say between them, but he quietly ensured that her elderly mother, who lived alone in a suburb outside the city and knew nothing of any of this, received an anonymous monthly payment for as long as she needed it. Some things weren't Ji-young's fault. Her mother's circumstances were one of them. Jin-soo noticed, as Jin-soo noticed everything. He said nothing about it except once, very quietly. "That was decent of you, boss." Bae-Hoon didn't reply, but he heard it. 6 weeks later, Ngozi brought Ada to meet him at a cafe on neutral ground, the kind of place where nobody notable ate and nobody watched. Ada had a school project tucked under her arm and wore an expression that suggested she had been looking forward to this. "You said I could ask one question when it was done," she reminded him, sitting down and placing her project on the table like she was setting up negotiations. He had said something approximately like that. "Go ahead. Do you feel better?" "Not just healthier. Better." Bae-Hoon considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think," he said slowly, "that I am beginning to understand the difference between those two things, which is probably long overdue." Ada seemed satisfied with this. She pushed her project toward him. It was titled, in neat, careful lettering, "How Traditional Medicine Protects Communities." "My grandmother helped me with the research. I thought maybe you'd like to read it." He read it, all 11 pages. Sitting in that cafe, while Ngozi drank tea and smiled at her daughter with a warmth that made the whole table feel different from the world Bae-Hoon usually occupied, he thought, as he turned the last page, that he had been building the wrong things for a long time. Not wrong in their structure or their execution. He was good at those. Wrong in what they were for. Power accumulated for its own protection, eventually consumed the thing it was meant to protect. He had known that intellectually since he was 19 years old, and watching what happened to his father. He had simply spent 15 years applying the lesson backwards. He returned Ada's project to her. "It's excellent," he said. "You should be proud of this." She was, he could tell, but she was also watching him with that old soul gaze of hers, and she said, "My grandmother says what you do with knowledge is more important than having it. What are you going to do with what you know now?" He didn't have the full answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, he was asking himself the question honestly. Thursday dinners happened gradually, and then all at once, the way most things that matter seem to. A follow-up conversation to check that Ngozi and Ada had returned home safely. A meal Ngozi insisted on preparing, because she was raised in a household that thanked people with food, and this, she said firmly, was a significant thank you. Then another, because Ada had something to show him. Then another, because the food was extraordinary and the table was loud and warm in a way his penthouse had never been in all the years he'd owned it. Bae-Hoon found, to his own careful surprise, that he looked forward to it. Ada's grandmother called from home one evening during dinner, and they put her on the large screen Bae-Hoon had quietly arranged to be installed on the wall, so the calls felt less small. She was a compact woman with a face that had lived a full life in it, and eyes that reminded him of Ada's with more decades behind them. She looked at him directly through the screen for a full 10 seconds before saying a single word. "So," she said finally, "you're the one my granddaughter decided to save." "Yes, ma'am. Tell me what you're doing with it." He told her honestly. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good. Now, do more," and moved on to telling Ada a story about a plant that bloomed exactly once every 7 years and how the whole village would gather to see it. Bae-Hoon sat at that table and felt, somewhere underneath the discipline and the scar tissue and the 15 years of building himself into something untouchable, the distant but real warmth of being seen by people who had no reason to see anything in him except what was actually there. It was unfamiliar. He did not tell anyone how much it mattered, but he stopped being as afraid of it as he had been. The challenges kept coming, because that was the nature of the world he still operated in. 2 months later, one of his oldest lieutenants, a man named Cho, came to him with shaking hands and a voice scraped raw. His daughter had been taken, a smaller rival faction, young and desperate, and willing to do ugly things to prove themselves. They wanted territory he hadn't been willing to give. Chio sat across from him with the particular hollow look of a parent waiting to hear what would happen next. Bae-Hoon recognized that look. He had seen in his own father's face the night everything changed. "I'll handle this," he said. He did not reach for the blunt instrument first. He reached for information, for leverage, for a precise pressure point that would collapse the situation without detonating it. The faction's leader had a younger brother in university on a partial scholarship that had quietly been redirected to a shell entity 3 months ago. Bae-Hoon had not known that until Jin-Soo pulled it up, but it mattered now. He made a call. He explained the situation in terms that required no elaboration. The girl was returned within 4 hours, frightened but unhurt. Chio wept in a way that men in their world rarely allowed themselves to weep. Bae-Hoon sat with him until he'd finished, said nothing unnecessary, and then said, "Your daughter is why we do the work we do, not the territory, not the power structure. Her. Remember that the next time you have to make a choice." Chio looked at him like he was seeing someone he hadn't quite met before. Word traveled the way it always traveled in their world, fast and distorted, but carrying the essential truth. Bae-Hoon had resolved it without a single act of violence. Some read this as weakness. Others, the ones who mattered more, read it as something far more difficult and rare to maintain: discipline. Co. Jean, a young woman who ran an adjacent independent operation with a reputation for being either brilliant or reckless, depending on who you asked, came to see him 6 weeks after the Chio situation. She arrived at his office wearing the specific expression of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and finally decided to say it. "I've been watching how you operate lately," she said, sitting down without being invited to, which he'd always respected in people. "Something's changed. Many things have changed, for the better or for your benefit, because in this world those are usually 2 different questions. I'm trying to make them the same question," he said. "I won't claim I fully succeeded." She studied him. "I want to propose an actual partnership, not territorial accommodation, a real operational collaboration where we both bring what we're good at and divide what comes from it fairly." She paused. "I've spent 3 years trying to grow something sustainable, and I keep hitting the ceiling of what I can do alone. You've spent 15 years building something that could last, but I think you're tired of what it's cost." She was not wrong about any of that. 60-40 in my favor, he said. You're newer in this. 55-45, she said. I'm newer, but I have less blood on the balance sheet, and that has value in where things are going. He almost smiled. 55-45. She extended her hand. He shook it, and just like that, another war that hadn't needed to happen didn't. It was Ada who noticed him changing before he noticed it himself. She mentioned it one Thursday evening with the simple directness she applied to everything, looking up from a homework problem she'd been working on and saying, "You laugh more than you used to." "I didn't used to laugh at all," he said. "I know. That's why I mentioned it." She went back to her homework. "It looks good on you." He thought about that for a long time afterward. The Haesung Foundation, named for his younger brother, who had died at 16 in the same succession of events that had stolen his father's business and his family's peace, launched on a quiet Thursday with a small private gathering that was, by design, nothing like the events Bae-Hoon usually attended. No press, no political optics, just the work laid out clearly: education access, job transition programs, young people in circumstances similar to ones he'd once navigated who needed a door held open. Ada sat in the front row and beamed like she'd built the whole thing herself. He supposed, in the way that counted most, he had written the Foundation's mission statement himself, 3 drafts over 2 weeks, and the line at the center of it was simple: the greatest resource any person possesses is someone willing to tell them the truth when it matters. Everything else is built on that. He stood at the podium that evening and looked out at the small room of people: Jin-soo, Chol, Seo-jin, Ngozi, Ada, a few others he had chosen carefully, and said something he hadn't planned to say. "I almost didn't exist long enough to be here." Someone very small and very brave decided to use her voice when it would have been much easier to stay quiet. "I'm trying to make sure that courage meant something." Ada, in the front row, covered her smile with both hands, which meant she was genuinely moved and didn't want it to show, which meant Bae-Hoon had to look away for a moment himself. Jin-soo said afterward, very quietly, "Your brother would have liked this." "Yes," Bae-Hoon said, "he would have." A year after Ada had walked up to a stranger's breakfast table, Bae-Hoon stood in his garden. A thing he had not owned before, a penthouse he no longer lived in, having been exchanged for a smaller house with an actual garden, which had surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. Planting a row of seeds that Ada's grandmother had sent from home, she had included a handwritten note. "These are for someone who is learning the difference between surviving and growing. Plant them with patience. Don't rush the blooming." He read it twice and kept it. Ada arrived that Saturday to check on the garden's progress, as she had appointed herself to do, and stood with her hands on her hips examining what he'd managed. "The spacing is wrong on the 3rd row," she informed him. "I know. I noticed after. Grandma says bad spacing at the start creates competition instead of community. The roots crowd each other. Your grandmother has an opinion on everything. That's why she's always right." Ada crouched down, examining a seedling with the focused attention she gave everything. "She wants to know how you're doing. She said you seemed lighter in the last call. She wants to know what changed." "Many things," he said, "all of them smaller than you'd expect." Ada looked up at him. "That's not an answer. It's the truest one I have." She considered this, then gave a small nod, satisfied enough. "I'm going to redesign your 3rd row," she announced, setting her bag down. "I know," he said, and brought her a trowel. 2 years after a small girl with her grandmother's wisdom in her eyes had told a dangerous man the truth he needed to hear, Bae-Hoon sat at a Thursday dinner surrounded by people who become, without drama or declaration, family. Ngozi had made her jollof rice with the fried plant on the side, and the way the whole apartment smelled had become one of his favorite things about being alive, which was not a sentence he would have recognized himself capable of thinking 2 years prior. Ada was 12 now, already accepted into an accelerated sciences program, already insufferably well-informed about things most adults couldn't follow. She had recently begun volunteering with the Foundation's youth program on weekends, which she had not asked permission to do, only informed him of after the fact. "You could have asked," he'd said. "You would have said yes," she'd replied. "I was saving time." He had not been able to argue with that. Tonight she was explaining something about plant-based compounds to Jin-soo, who was nodding with the expression of a man who understood nothing but was too respectful of the speaker to admit it. Ngozi was talking with Co Jean across the table, the two of them having become improbably and wonderfully genuine friends over the last year. Bae-Hoon sat at the end of the table and watched it all and thought about what Ada had said once, about doing the right thing even when it cost you something. It had cost her something. Walking up to that table had been a risk she had no reason to take. And what had grown from it, this table, this noise, this improbable warmth, had not been what either of them could have planned for. That was the thing about courage. You couldn't always see what it would build. You only knew, in the moment, that it was right. Later, washing dishes while Ngozi packed up leftovers and Ada chased a homework deadline in the next room, Bae-Hoon thought about his brother, about what Hae-sung would have made of all of this. He had been the gentle one, the laughing one, the one who believed people were more good than bad and had not lived long enough to have that faith complicated. Bae-Hoon had spent 15 years building an empire partly in grief and partly in fury, and partly because the alternative had been to feel the full weight of losing him, and he had not been ready for that weight. He was more ready now. He didn't know entirely why. He thought it had something to do with learning. Late, but not too late. That love was not the vulnerability his world had taught him it was. That the people who had gathered around this table on Thursday evenings, who had chosen him without being owed anything, who had told him the truth without softening it, who had held him accountable with the same warmth they held him with, these people were not the gap in his armor. They were the reason the armor was worth wearing in the first place. The phone rang. Jin-soo. Something about a situation developing in the East District. Bae-Hoon dried his hands, picked up the call. "Tell me," he said. He listened for 2 minutes. Then he said, "You know what to do? Use your judgment first. Call me if it can't be resolved cleanly." A pause. "Yes, I trust you. Jin-soo. Go." He hung up and stood for a moment in Ngozi's kitchen while the sounds of Ada's frustrated muttering over homework and Co Jean's laughter and the city humming outside filled the air around him. Then he went back to the table and sat down, and Ada looked up from her work and said, without looking at him, "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he said. "And mend it." 3 years after a child named Adaeze told a powerful man a terrifying truth, Bae-Hoon received a call that made him sit very still for a long moment. Ada had been selected. The early entry medical sciences program, the most competitive in the country, full scholarship, full funding, the door thrown open wide for everything her grandmother had always said she was meant for. He drove to the apartment himself, which was not something he typically did for anything, and when Ngozi opened the door, her face already told him she knew why he was there and that she had been crying in the best possible way. Ada came around the corner with her acceptance letter, and he put out his hand to shake hers because she was too old for anything more, and she looked at him with those eyes that had always carried more life in them than was reasonable and said, "We did it." He thought about correcting her, about pointing out that she had done it, that her intelligence and discipline and grandmother's teaching and own relentless curiosity had built this. But she was right, wasn't she? They had done it, together, across a hotel lobby, and 3 years of Thursday dinners and a foundation, and a garden, and seeds planted with patience, and all the small brave choices that added up to something neither of them could have planned. "Yes," he said, "we did." That evening, Bae-Hoon called Ada's grandmother on a large screen. She looked at him for a long moment after he told her the news, and her expression held everything words were insufficient for. "You kept your promise," she said finally. "She made it easy." "Nothing about that child is easy," her grandmother said, laughing. "She is magnificent and exhausting. You know this." "Yes," he said, "I know this." "Good." She leaned toward the camera, slightly. "And you? What comes next for you?" He had been asking himself that question for months. The organization was genuinely, substantively different now. 70% legitimate business, the rest in transition. Co Jean and Jin-soo holding the architecture together with steady hands. The foundation was growing in ways that exceeded his initial design. He had a garden. He had Thursday dinners. He had, somewhere along the way, learned to sleep without keeping one eye open. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "Good," she said again, with great satisfaction. A man who has finished figuring things out has stopped being interesting. She waved her hand. "Go eat dinner. You look thin." He was not thin, but he went and ate dinner, and it was good. 5 years to the day after Ada had walked up to his breakfast table, Bae-Hoon stood in the back of a lecture hall at the university and listened to a 17-year-old give a presentation on traditional African plant medicine and its application in modern pharmaceutical research. And she was the best speaker in the room by an enormous distance, and he was very careful to stand at the very back, so nobody would notice him pressing his thumb to the corner of his eye. He failed at that, somewhat. Seo Jean was standing next to him, and she noticed, as she noticed everything, and she said nothing except to bump his shoulder lightly with her own. After the presentation, Ada found him in the hallway with her notes still in her hand and her eyes bright. "Did you hear the question in the third row?" she demanded. He tried to challenge my sourcing on the alkaloid compounds, and I had 3 peer-reviewed papers, and he had an opinion. "I heard," Bae-Hoon said. "You were excellent." "I know." She grinned. Then, quieter, "Thank you for being here. Where else would I be?" She looked at him. This child who was not a child anymore, who would go on to do things neither of them could fully imagine yet, who had changed his life with 30 seconds of courage in a hotel lobby and then never asked for anything except the truth in return. "You're going to be okay," she said, not as reassurance, as fact, the same way she'd said everything that mattered. "I know," he said, and for the first time in 15 years of survival and building and loss and discipline, he believed it completely. If this story found something in you, something you need to feel today, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment right now. What moment stayed with you the longest? And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is built for stories exactly like this one. Stories about courage and redemption, about the people who save us and the ones we learn to become. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I love knowing who's in this community with me. Until the next story, stay brave, stay open, and remember that sometimes the most powerful thing in any room is the person willing to simply tell the truth.